The emergency call lasted just 2 minutes and 47 seconds. By the time police officers reached the address, only 3 minutes had passed. The lights were still on. The front door was standing open. A cell phone lay on the kitchen floor, the line still connected to emergency dispatch. But the man who had made the desperate call had completely disappeared. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No body. No explanation. More disturbing still, investigators would soon discover muddy footprints that ended in the middle of the living room, security cameras that mysteriously stopped recording moments before the disappearance, and neighbors who claimed strange lights hovered near the property that same night. More than a decade later, investigators still ask one question. What happened to Daniel Carter? It was 11:41 p.m. on a cold October night when 34-year-old Daniel Carter dialed emergency services from his suburban home. Friends later described Daniel as dependable, level-headed, and not someone who panicked easily. He worked remotely as a software consultant, lived alone, and had no known history of mental illness or criminal activity. That made what happened next even more disturbing. According to dispatch records, Daniel sounded terrified from the moment the operator answered. His breathing was rapid. His voice shook. He repeatedly whispered that someone had been standing outside his house for nearly 20 minutes. Not knocking. Not speaking. Just watching. The dispatcher asked him to lock every door and stay on the line. Daniel confirmed every entrance was secured. Then he paused. Several seconds passed without a word. The dispatcher asked if he could still hear her. Daniel answered with only 4 words. "He's closer now." The operator immediately informed him that officers were already on the way. Daniel whispered something too quietly for investigators to fully recover from the recording. Then there was the unmistakable sound of a door slowly creaking open somewhere inside the house. The dispatcher repeatedly called Daniel's name. No response. Only silence. Exactly 17 seconds later, the call disconnected. At 11:44 p.m., 2 patrol officers turned onto Daniel Street. What they found would become one of the most puzzling disappearances in the town's history. The front door stood wide open despite Daniel insisting moments earlier that every entrance had been locked. The television was still playing in the living room. Lights illuminated every room downstairs. Dinner sat untouched on the kitchen counter. His cell phone rested face down near the refrigerator, still connected to the emergency dispatcher. But Daniel Carter was nowhere inside the house. Not upstairs. Not in the basement. Not outside. It was as if he had vanished within the 3 minutes it took officers to arrive. Police immediately secured the property and began searching the surrounding neighborhood. Officers checked nearby streets, backyards, wooded areas, and drainage ditches. Police dogs were brought in before sunrise. The search produced nothing. No footprints leading away from the property. No discarded clothing. No signs that anyone had left through the back of the house. The only certainty was that Daniel had been inside when he made the call. By the time police arrived, he was gone. That was only the beginning of the mystery. The first investigators entered Daniel Carter's home just after midnight. Their initial assessment was surprisingly ordinary. Nothing appeared overturned. Furniture remained perfectly arranged. Windows were locked from the inside. No broken glass. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a violent struggle. For a brief moment, detectives considered the possibility that Daniel had simply walked away before officers arrived. That theory lasted less than 10 minutes. As the crime scene technicians carefully photographed every room, one investigator noticed faint muddy marks near the back hallway. At first glance, they looked like ordinary shoe prints tracked in from outside. But something about them didn't make sense. The footprints began near the rear entrance, continued through the hallway, crossed into the living room, Then they simply stopped. Not faded. Not turned. Stopped. The final print sat in the middle of the hardwood floor with no matching footprints leading away. Investigators measured every impression. The tread pattern appeared consistent with a heavy outdoor hiking boot, approximately a men's size 10. Forensic specialists searched the floor using alternate light sources, hoping additional prints had simply become invisible to the naked eye. Nothing. There were no drag marks. No barefoot impressions. No secondary shoe prints. Just a trail that ended as though its owner had disappeared with the last step. The discovery immediately transformed the investigation. Detectives asked a simple question. If someone had entered the house, how did they leave? The mystery deepened only minutes later. Inside the kitchen, beneath a ceramic coffee mug resting on the counter, investigators found a folded sheet of notebook paper. At first it appeared to be nothing more than a grocery list. But when crime scene analysts unfolded it, they realized the writing stopped abruptly in the middle of a sentence. It read, "If anything happens to me, don't believe." Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. No final word. Handwriting experts later confirmed the note had almost certainly been written by Daniel himself earlier that evening. The ink matched a pen found beside his laptop. But what was he trying to say? Don't believe who? Or what? Every possible ending raised even more questions. Detectives searched Daniel's computer, phone records, emails, and financial accounts, hoping the unfinished sentence pointed toward someone in his life. Instead, they found almost nothing unusual. No threatening emails. No suspicious bank withdrawals. No evidence he planned to leave. No secret relationships. His internet history consisted mostly of work-related searches, news articles, and streaming websites. To everyone who knew him, Daniel's day had been completely normal. Around 8 p.m., he ordered takeout from a nearby restaurant. At 8:37 p.m., security footage showed the delivery driver handing him the food. Daniel even smiled and thanked him before closing the door. The driver later told investigators there was nothing unusual about Daniel's behavior. He seemed tired, he recalled, but definitely not scared. Somewhere between that delivery and the emergency call 3 hours later, everything changed. Investigators then turned their attention to the home security system. Daniel had installed 4 high-definition cameras around the property only 6 months earlier. If someone had approached the house, the cameras should have captured everything. When detectives reviewed the recordings, the footage appeared completely normal until exactly 11:36 p.m. 5 minutes before Daniel called emergency services. Without warning, every camera froze on the same frame. No static. No flickering. No power outage. The recording simply stopped. The system itself remained powered on. Its internal clock continued running. Yet no new footage existed until officers arrived and manually restarted the recorder. Cybercrime specialists examined the hard drive for signs of hacking or deleted files. Nothing. The missing minutes had never been recorded at all. Even more puzzling, the neighboring home security cameras suffered no interruptions that night. Only Daniel's system failed. Coincidence? Equipment malfunction? Or had someone intentionally disabled the cameras before approaching the house? By sunrise, investigators were no closer to understanding what had happened. Instead of answers, every piece of evidence seemed to contradict the last. A trail of footprints that ended nowhere. A warning note left unfinished. Security cameras that went blind just before the disappearance. And a man who had called police for help, only to vanish before they could reach him. The investigation was no longer just a missing person case. It had become something far stranger. By sunrise, Daniel Carter's disappearance had become the only thing anyone in town was talking about. Detectives knew the first 24 hours were critical. If Daniel had been abducted, every minute mattered. If he had left on his own, someone had almost certainly seen him. A team of investigators began reconstructing every second of Daniel's final known movements. Using phone records, surveillance footage, and witness interviews, they pieced together a detailed timeline. At 8:37 p.m., Daniel accepted his food delivery. At 9:12 p.m., he exchanged a brief text with a coworker about a software project due the following week. The conversation was completely ordinary. There was no hint of fear, stress, or urgency. At 10:48 p.m., his smart television automatically switched to a true crime documentary he had been watching. Then, at 11:41 p.m., everything changed. Daniel called emergency services. 3 minutes later, he was gone. The timeline was astonishingly small. Somehow, whatever happened inside that house had occurred in less time than it takes to boil a kettle. Investigators expanded their search beyond the property. They went door to door, interviewing every neighbor within a 2-block radius. Most reported hearing nothing unusual. No screams. No gunshots. No vehicles speeding away. No sounds of a struggle. For a while, it seemed the neighborhood had slept through the entire incident. Then one interview changed everything. An elderly woman who lived directly across the street hesitated before speaking. She admitted she hadn't called police because she wasn't sure what she had seen. Around 11:35 p.m., while closing her bedroom curtains, she noticed several strange lights near Daniel's backyard. They weren't headlights. They weren't flashlights. She described them as small, pale white lights moving silently between the trees. They didn't move like people carrying torches, she later told detectives. They drifted, almost as if they were floating. When investigators asked how many lights she had seen, she couldn't be certain. Maybe 2, maybe 3. Just as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. Detectives remained cautious. Human memory, especially during late-night events, can be unreliable. Still, her statement couldn't simply be ignored. Then another witness came forward. A man walking his dog roughly half a mile away reported seeing an unusually bright flash in the direction of Daniel's neighborhood at approximately the same time. He assumed a transformer had exploded. But power companies later confirmed there had been no electrical failures anywhere in the area that night. Neither witness knew Daniel personally. Neither had spoken to each other before giving their statements. Yet both described something unusual occurring within minutes of the disappearance. Investigators searched the wooded area behind Daniel's property hoping to find tire tracks, discarded clothing, or evidence that someone had fled on foot. Instead, search teams found only damp ground and fallen leaves. No footprints. No broken branches. No signs that anyone had passed through. It was as though the forest itself had remained untouched. Meanwhile, forensic analysts returned to Daniel's home for a second examination. Using advanced fingerprint powders and chemical enhancement techniques, they recovered dozens of usable prints. Almost every one belonged to Daniel. The remaining fingerprints matched the food delivery driver and several friends who had visited weeks earlier. No unidentified fingerprints were found anywhere inside the house. Even more surprising, there was no DNA from any unknown individual. No stray hair. No blood. No fibers inconsistent with Daniel's clothing. If someone had entered that house, they had left almost nothing behind. The investigation was beginning to divide even experienced detectives. Some believed the answer was hiding in plain sight. Others feared they were chasing clues that didn't belong together at all. Every new discovery seemed to create 2 more unanswered questions. The unfinished note suggested Daniel expected something to happen. The emergency call proved he believed someone was outside. The mysterious lights hinted that another witness had seen something unusual. Yet there was still no physical evidence placing another person at the scene. One detective later described the investigation with a single sentence that would appear in internal case notes. "Everything fits, except the part that matters." Who, or what, caused Daniel Carter to vanish during those 3 missing minutes? The evidence refused to point in one direction. And that uncertainty would soon give rise to the first major theory. One that, at first glance, seemed almost impossible to dismiss. As the investigation entered its second week, detectives were under increasing pressure to explain what had happened inside Daniel Carter's home. The public wanted answers. The media demanded a suspect. And investigators had little more than a collection of impossible clues. The first major theory quickly gained momentum. Someone had abducted Daniel. At first, the idea seemed to fit the evidence. Daniel had sounded genuinely terrified during the emergency call. His voice showed no signs of acting or exaggeration. Audio specialists later analyzed the recording and concluded that his elevated breathing, broken speech, and trembling voice were consistent with someone experiencing real fear. He repeatedly insisted that someone was outside watching him. If he was telling the truth, then an intruder may have been waiting for the right moment to enter. The muddy footprints appeared to support that possibility. They suggested someone had entered the house from the back in trance after walking across the wet ground behind the property. The unfinished note hinted that Daniel may have believed he was already in danger before making the emergency call. Then there were the security cameras. Why would every camera stop recording exactly 5 minutes before Daniel disappeared? Some investigators believed the cameras had been deliberately disabled. If that were true, the person responsible likely knew the property well enough to avoid leaving behind obvious evidence. Detectives began reviewing Daniel's personal life in extraordinary detail. His finances, his friendships, his workplace. Even minor disagreements from years earlier were re-examined. Former co-workers, neighbors, distant relatives, and college friends were interviewed. No one could identify anyone who might have wanted to harm him. His bank account showed no unusual transactions. His passport remained inside the house. His car was still parked in the driveway. There was no evidence of blackmail, organized crime, gambling debt, or personal enemies. The deeper investigators looked, the less likely an abduction appeared. Then forensic analysts made another troubling discovery. Every exterior door had been tested for fingerprints and microscopic tool marks. There was no evidence that any lock had been forced. No scratches. No damaged hinges. No broken latches. According to the forensic report, every lock was functioning normally. If an intruder had entered. How? The front door had been found open when officers arrived. But Daniel himself had told the dispatcher only moments earlier that every entrance was locked. Did someone force him to open the door? Or had he opened it willingly? Neither answer made complete sense. Even the muddy footprints began creating more questions than answers. Laboratory analysis revealed the mud contained ordinary soil and decaying plant material consistent with the wooded area behind Daniel's home. Nothing unusual. Nothing rare. Nothing that could identify where the person had come from. But one detail puzzled forensic experts. The footprint showed the weight distribution of someone walking normally. Not running. Not struggling. If an abductor had entered the home, why would they walk calmly toward the living room? And if they forced Daniel to leave, why were there no exit footprints? Investigators recreated the scene dozens of times. They tested different shoes, different floor conditions, different lighting. No reconstruction explained how a complete trail could simply end. The theory suffered another major setback when detectives analyzed traffic cameras from roads surrounding the neighborhood. Every vehicle entering or leaving the area during the relevant time frame was identified and tracked. Drivers were interviewed. Delivery records were checked. License plates were verified. Nothing connected to Daniel. No suspicious van. No unidentified vehicle. No evidence that anyone transported him away. Even search dogs complicated the theory. Canines trained to track human scent followed Daniel's trail from the kitchen to the front hallway, then suddenly lost it near the open doorway. The scent didn't continue down the driveway. It didn't lead toward the road. It didn't enter the woods. It simply ended. Experienced handlers described the result as highly unusual. Not impossible, but unusual enough that several investigators requested a second search using different dogs. The outcome was exactly the same. Despite weeks of investigation, the abduction theory remained both compelling and deeply flawed. It explained Daniel's fear. It explained the emergency call. It even offered a possible reason for the disabled security cameras. But it failed to answer the most important questions. How had someone entered without leaving evidence? How had they removed an adult man in less than 3 minutes without being seen or heard? And why had they left behind every clue? Except the one investigators needed most. The more detectives tried to prove Daniel had been taken by someone else, the more the evidence quietly pushed them toward an even more unsettling possibility. What if no one had taken Daniel at all? By the third month of the investigation, the search for Daniel Carter had reached a standstill. Thousands of volunteer hours had been logged. Nearby lakes had been searched by dive teams. Drones equipped with thermal imaging had scanned miles of forest. Detectives had followed every credible tip, every reported sighting, and every anonymous phone call. Each lead ended the same way. Nothing. With no suspect, no ransom demand, and no physical evidence pointing to an abductor, investigators were forced to consider a possibility they had initially dismissed. What if Daniel had planned his own disappearance? On paper, the theory appeared surprisingly reasonable. After all, the only confirmed witness to the terrifying events inside the house was Daniel himself. No one had actually seen an intruder. No one had heard another voice during the emergency call. If Daniel had staged everything, the mysterious clues could have been carefully planted to mislead investigators. The unfinished note. The muddy footprints. Even the frantic phone call. Detectives began digging deeper into his personal life than ever before. They examined years of financial records. Every bank transfer. Every credit card purchase. Every online payment. People who vanish voluntarily almost always leave behind a trail, hidden savings, fake identities, secret relationships, travel plans, or unusual withdrawals. Daniel left none. His salary had been deposited into the same account for years. There were no unexplained cash withdrawals. No purchases of camping equipment, burner phones, or new identification documents. His passport remained inside a bedroom drawer. His laptop contained unfinished work projects due the following week. His refrigerator was fully stocked with groceries purchased only 2 days before he disappeared. Friends confirmed he had recently discussed plans for an upcoming family gathering. Nothing suggested someone preparing to abandon his entire life. Then detectives reviewed the emergency call again. This time, they weren't listening for another person's voice. They were listening for Daniel's. Behavioral analysts studied every pause, every breath, and every change in his tone. Could fear be convincingly acted? Possibly. But according to multiple experts, Daniel's reaction sounded spontaneous rather than rehearsed. His breathing became increasingly irregular as the call progressed. His speech grew fragmented. Several responses interrupted the dispatcher's questions instead of matching them naturally, a common sign of genuine panic. One analyst summarized the findings in a single sentence. If this was an act, it was one of the most convincing performances I've ever analyzed. The staged disappearance theory began losing support. But another explanation slowly gained attention. Some investigators wondered whether Daniel had suffered a sudden psychological breakdown. Perhaps he genuinely believed someone was watching him when no one was actually there. Stress, sleep deprivation, or an undiagnosed mental health crisis could, in rare cases, cause extreme paranoia. The theory explained why no intruder had been identified. It explained why Daniel sounded terrified. It even explained why neighbors hadn't seen anyone outside the house. Yet once again, the evidence refused to cooperate. Daniel's medical record showed no history of psychosis, hallucinations, or severe mental illness. Family members described him as calm, practical, and emotionally stable. Co-workers who had spoken with him just hours before the disappearance noticed nothing unusual. Even more difficult to explain were the physical clues left behind. A psychological episode could not account for the muddy footprints ending in the middle of the living room. It could not explain why every security camera stopped recording at precisely the wrong moment. And it certainly couldn't explain the witness statements describing strange lights near the property before Daniel called police. Investigators found themselves trapped between competing theories. Each one answered a few questions. Each one created even more. Months turned into years. The evidence was re-examined. New forensic techniques were applied. The emergency call was digitally enhanced multiple times in hopes of recovering hidden sounds beneath the static. Some audio experts believed they detected a faint metallic noise just seconds before the line went silent. Others argued it was nothing more than interference. No conclusion could be reached. One detective, who had spent nearly 2 decades investigating major crimes, later admitted that Daniel Carter's case was unlike anything he had ever encountered. "Every theory gets you halfway," he said. "Then the evidence stops you cold." It was a case built from fragments. A frightened phone call. An open front door. Footprints that ended nowhere. A warning never finished. And a man who seemed to vanish in the space of just 3 minutes. But the most chilling chapter of the investigation was still to come. Years passed. The missing person posters faded from telephone poles. News crews stopped returning to Daniel Carter's quiet neighborhood. The search teams were eventually disbanded. But inside the police department, one case file continued to gather new notes long after every other lead had disappeared. Daniel Carter. Missing. Unexplained. Officially unsolved. Every few years, detectives reopened the investigation, hoping that advances in forensic science or a forgotten witness might finally reveal what happened during those 3 missing minutes. Each review ended exactly where the first investigation had, with more questions than answers. By then, 4 major theories had emerged. The first was abduction. It explained Daniel's fear during the emergency call and the possibility that someone had been watching his house. The muddy footprints and disabled security cameras seemed to support the idea that another person had been there that night. But the theory collapsed under one crucial problem. No suspect was ever identified. No DNA. No fingerprints. No vehicle. No ransom demand. No evidence showing how an abductor entered or escaped with a healthy adult man in less than 3 minutes. The second theory suggested Daniel staged his own disappearance. Perhaps he wanted to start a new life. Perhaps the emergency call was part of an elaborate plan. But investigators found no secret bank accounts, no hidden identity, no travel arrangements, and no reason for him to abandon everything he had built. His money remained untouched. His phone stayed behind. Even his favorite jacket was still hanging by the front door. People who choose to disappear usually prepare for it. Daniel hadn't. The third theory focused on a psychological breakdown. Could overwhelming fear have caused him to flee into the night? Behavioral experts admitted it was possible. But if Daniel had run away on foot, why did search dogs lose his scent only a few feet from the doorway? Why were there no footprints leaving the property? And why had neighbors reported unusual lights only minutes before he vanished? Again, the theory answered some questions, while leaving the most important ones untouched. That left only one final possibility. Something happened that investigators simply couldn't explain with the evidence available. Not something supernatural. Not something impossible. Just something that left too little evidence for anyone to reconstruct. Retired detectives often describe cases like this as missing pieces investigations. The truth exists. Someone knows it. But one critical piece is gone forever. Years after Daniel's disappearance, construction workers renovating an abandoned storage building nearly 20 miles away discovered a small cardboard box hidden behind a damaged wall. Inside were old newspapers, empty food wrappers, and several unrelated personal belongings. Among them was an inexpensive keychain identical to one Daniel's sister remembered giving him years earlier. For a brief moment, hope returned. The item was sent for forensic testing. No fingerprints survived. No usable DNA remained. Investigators could never prove the keychain had belonged to Daniel. The discovery led nowhere. Then came another reported sighting. A truck driver claimed he had spoken to a man at a roadside diner whose appearance closely matched Daniel's. The stranger seemed nervous and left before anyone could identify him. Security footage from the diner was too grainy for facial recognition. The lead was investigated for months before being quietly closed. Like every lead before it, it vanished. Today, the evidence remains locked inside dozens of investigation boxes. The emergency call, the unfinished note, the forensic reports, the photographs of footprints that ended where no footprints should end. Every document has been reviewed countless times. Every recording has been replayed. Every theory has been challenged. Yet none can fully explain what happened inside Daniel Carter's home that night. Perhaps someone was watching him. Perhaps he opened the door for a reason only he understood. Perhaps the answer has been hiding inside the evidence all along, waiting for one overlooked detail to bring the entire puzzle into focus. Or perhaps the truth disappeared with Daniel himself. To this day, Daniel Carter has never been found. No confirmed sightings. No arrests. No confession. No body. His disappearance remains one of the most baffling unsolved cases ever investigated. And somewhere, hidden within those missing 3 minutes, lies an answer that no one has been able to uncover.